virtue signaling thing, that can use a fair bit of unpacking, because there's a real technical reason that occurs, and it poses a continual threat to the integrity of society at large. It's narcissists and Machiavellian psychopaths, they call that the Dark Triad. Those people are very, very good at sending up camouflage that makes them look like they're useful and productive.
Right.
And that's actually their strategy. You see that a lot with these guys that are like women's rights advocates and that go to the protests that where women often predominate. It's like, oh yeah, you're here on the women's side, are you? I know what sort of character you are.
What sort of character is that, though? That is a good question.
Predator.
Right.
Like a real predator. It's like, oh, I'm on your side, and maybe you'll climb into bed with me.
It's very difficult to call that out in a sense, though, isn't it? Because I don't know.
They're the white knight in shining armor in that instance.
Right.
If you're, because you had an attack video done on you in a similar sense. So what is that? Why do you think people do that?
To elevate themselves falsely in the status hierarchy so that they're more attractive to women, but also so that they have a position among men that they don't deserve. Instead of earning it, they just fake it. It's all manipulation, and they call the people who are good at that are part of the Dark Triad of personality traits: Machiavellian, psychopathic, and narcissistic. And so it's a form of camouflage fakery. So it's like a guy who will, dress above his stature economically. Now that's a much less toxic example of it, because that can be aspirational too, right? He's trying to look better so he can clue in. But the pickup artist types, for example, they tell their advocates to peacock, to dress above their status level. And the reason they do that is because then they can signal competence that they don't have, right? Because your style of dress is a marker of your social status. And there's, for men and for women, there's lots of different ways of doing that, because it depends on which hierarchy you want to be placed properly in. But you signal with your dress your status. And so then you can falsely signal. And you do that so that people are more impressed with you than you deserve. And so it's a cheap way to gain reputation. And there isn't anything more important to people than reputation. And so really that virtue signaling is false reputation signaling. And it's a form of deception. It's a deep form of deception. And social media enables it like mad.
Because the masses are stupid, in my opinion, a lot of the time, and they just fall for it. They don't say...
It's a funny thing. It's because it is a kind of willful blindness, and sometimes it's a kind of ignorance. But once you have a society that's basically based on trust, and our societies are basically based on trust, then people can exploit that trust, right? They can act as if they're trustworthy agents, honest agents, and gain the access and opportunities that you could gain reasonably if you were honest, but you can do it in a completely deceptive way. And I really do think the social media networks in particular have massively expanded that problem, because you as a narcissistic and predatory outsider, your voice can be magnified like mad. All this trolling behavior on social media, comment sections in particular, it's so pathological. It's like, well, you know what it's like. You guys have experienced this.
Absolutely.
People will say things in the comment section on YouTube that would absolutely 100% get them punched instantly if they ever said it to your face.
Oh yeah.
And
I mean, that's
I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting, because if they were face to face with you, they wouldn't dare utter a word like that. But as soon as you put people, especially people who can't control themselves and who are resentful, as soon as you put them behind a wall in some sense, they can say whatever they want to whoever they want and get away with it.
I think I've been targeted a little bit more because of kind of how big guy, all of that stuff.
Bet.
I think people get a bit of a thrill out of almost like
poking the beast.
Of course they do.
Yeah, like shouting at the line through the cage a little bit, like it. And
especially,
I think that's made me more of a target, without a doubt, in the last sort of few years.
Yeah. They do the same thing to Dan Crenshaw. He's a congressman in Washington. He's a tough guy. He was in Afghanistan. He lost an eye in combat. Dan's a tough guy. He was a Navy SEAL. And the trolls come after him like mad. It's like, oh, there's a war hero. Poke. It's like, poke him in person and see what the hell happens. But no, it's really
very
not
bitchy
good.
sort of way of living your life,
God,
isn't it?
It's so sad.
I guess
I don't presume we're on, are we?
No, we are. Yeah,
we are.
So sorry. Yeah,
It's all good.
No, it's good.
If you want anything cut out, then you're more than welcome to.
No, that's fine.
I mean, I kind of feel like you don't need an introduction, with all due respect, Jordan. You are probably the most viewed podcast guest in history at this point.
God, that's a terrifying thought.
That's quite amazing. I think well done to you. You know what I mean?
Thank you, sir.
And you've done that on content, not on.
Not on virtue signaling.
Well, you've done it on. To me, what content is supposed to be about, which is quality and not that everyone should agree all the time, and I'm sure, I might not have agreed with everything you've said, but you're bringing opinions and important information to the table rather than just bubblegum for the people out there who...
we're trying real hard not to be a content mill, and I have this new deal with Daily Wire Plus, which seems to be going very well, and they're more corporate than me because I'm just me, and I have some people around me, obviously. But there's always a tendency, once something gets established, and there gets to be a bit of a schedule behind it as well, and then maybe say a corporate expectation. You can easily get pulled into the content mill thought process. We have to produce something of this length for this time. It's like it's very, very hard to avoid that. One of the things that's so nice about YouTube, because it doesn't have to be done exactly to a schedule and there's no bandwidth limitation, is you don't have to be dragged into the content mill process. I went to a lot of television interviews, much less in the last few years, but when I started to become more popular, and it was so interesting going into TV studios because I always felt like a product, and that's how the interviewers generally treated me too. Yeah. And they were often sound bites, a couple of minutes, right? You're just there to fill a gap. But that is what you were there for. Because it was a maw that had to be fed constantly, especially with broadcast TV, because they had to fill all the time. And so what they filled it with, in some sense, became subordinate to the fact that it needed to be filled. And that's partly what accounted for the falseness of legacy media, because it turned into a content mill. And you could see that happening with comedians too. You'd get some edgy comic and then they'd get hired to write a sitcom. And then the sitcom would be pretty good, but then they had to produce the damn half an hour every week for like 5 years. And man, that's a lot of content. And so they tended to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. Some series managed that really effectively. The Simpsons was pretty damn good for about 15 years, which is a hell of a run. And then not even too bad after that. Yeah. But it seems that it's kind of run its course recently. I've watched some recent years, and it's starting to be a parody of The Simpsons instead of The Simpsons,
It's a little bit like... Actually, he's another Canadian. Marshall McLuhan said, medium is the message. Yeah. People just get put into the medium and they just then become subject to it almost. Yeah, well, that was really McLuhan's point, was that just when a new technology arises, don't be thinking that, first of all, that you understand the technology or that it's merely a replacement for the previous technology. I see this with legacy media companies that try to use YouTube. CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, is a good example. They just can't get any traction at all on YouTube. And the reason for that is they think YouTube is just TV, except not as good. So first of all, they have contempt for their audience, right? It's like, YouTube, that's for, trolls and ne'er-do-wells, misogynists and bigots and racists and people on the fringe, like Joe Rogan on the fringe, because they are foolish enough to think that someone like Rogan is on the fringe, which I think is really funny. And so when CBC started to put their content, like news clips, for example, on YouTube, they put up 10 minutes of content with 3 minutes of ads at the beginning. 3 minutes, and you couldn't skip them. And then they disable comments. It's like, you guys don't understand this medium at all. It's like you get one ad, 15 seconds long, people have to be able to skip it, and you don't get to disable comments. It's like, who do you think you are? Well, we're CBC. It's like, that's why you have no viewers, because you roundly deserve it.